My name is Ashwant. Today I'm going to say about identification authentication. Introduction. Computer-based information systems in general and internet, e-commerce and e-business systems in particular employ many types of resources that need to be protected against access by unauthorized users. Three main components of access control are used in most information systems: identification, authentication, and authorization. We want to focus on authentication, which is the most problematic component. The three main approaches to user authentication are knowledge-based, possession-based, and biometric-based. We are going to compare the various authentication mecha- mechanisms of these approaches and the technology and implementation issues what they involve. Identification. First of all, what is identification? Means who are you? User supplies information to identify themselves, such as name, username, and user ID. Supplying identification information does not prove that the user is who and what he says. To use the internet and other information technologies is an integral part of business strategies. With so many companies taking advantage of these technologies for their own information systems, for business exchange, and for e-commerce, the security problems that they use an issue of primary concern. If their potential is not to be limited, the information systems in general and internet information systems in particular need to be ensured that the only internet user can access their resources. The three main components of access control: identification, authentication, and authorization are closely related. In security systems, however, they should be operated apart. Failure to do so can lead to serious security problems. Authentication. Authentication means you have to prove your identification. The user verifies her identity. Some examples of authentication mechanisms are users selected passwords, system generated passwords, passphrases, question and answer password tokens, and various biometric characteristics. But the most systems, identification and authentication are the first line of defense to prevent unauthorized user from entering the system. Authorization. What are you allowed to do? The system determines what the identified and authenticated user can actually access and what information he is allowed to carry out. Authentication is on predefined criteria and user profiles. These three components of access control can be found in almost all security systems. The most problematic is the authentication component. The traditional and conventional approach for authorization and access control are not appropriate for addressing the requirements of network, internet, or disturbed information systems. Other technologies and approaches need to be considered. The traditional and by far most widely used form of authentication is the password. However, as the number of systems used by individual users grows and the number of passwords required increases, users tend to duplicate their passwords and causes the domino effect of password reuse, namely all the systems with the same password are no more secure than the weakest system using this password. Authentication. The most computer systems are protected through a process of user identification and authentication. While identification is usually non-private information provided by the user to identify herself and can be known by the system administrators and other system users. Authentication provides secret and private information. The authentication method can be divided into three types. For the user know, that is password, PIN, question and refer to the knowledge-based authentication. It is based on private information supplied by the user. What the user has, a memory card and or a smart card tokens refer to the position based on authentication. It is based on private objects that the user possesses. What the user is, that is fingerprint, iris scan, and signature dynamics, referred as a biometric based authentication. It is based on autonomical, physiological, or behavioral characteristics. Identification. As you can see, the user only has user ID and name. what the user has is password, or what the user has only is smart cards. The water only user has is fingerprint and finger scan. While it may appear that many of these types can provide efficient authentication, each exhibits its own benefits and drawbacks. Trade-off needs to be made among security, ease of use, and ease of administration. The authentication types can be used alone or in combination. If one type is being used, it is referred to as one type or single factor authentication. If two types are used, it is referred as two types factor authentication. And if all three types are used, it is referred as all three type or multi-factor authentication. For the authentication process to be considered strong, it must be at least two two type two type knowledge based authentication. Knowledge verification. The most widely used type of authentication is knowledge based authentication. Examples of knowledge based authentications are password, passphrases, or pass sentences, graphical passwords, and pins. The traditional and by far most widely used form of authentication based on the user's knowledge is the password. A password is conceptually simple for both system designers and end users. It consists of a secret service of characters according to some predefined rules. The user ID and password pairs servers for user identification and authentication to ensure that unauthorized users do not access the system and to block unauthorized access to the computing's resources. In most systems, it can provide effective protection if it is used correctly. However, passwords are known to suffer from several pitfalls due to human information processing limitation. The trade-off between memorizing and safety. Passwords should be difficult to guess and easy to remember. Unfortunately, difficult to guess and crack passwords are difficult to remember. And easy to remember passwords are easy to guess and crack. That poses a dilemma in the generation of passwords. The most secure password is the random string of characters. Such passwords are difficult to guess by others, but, but difficult to remember. To remember them, users write down, which reduces their secrecy. Moreover, the most users have multiple passwords for different systems and applications, forcing them to remember several passwords to help them remember. They usually choose meaningful strings such as name, nickname, or initial, which are easy to remember but also easy to crack. To improve password security, the following are suggested to choosing and maintaining passwords. Non-dictionary and no-name passwords. The non-dictionary words prevents the use of dictionary-based attacks. The only way to identify non-dictionary or non-name password is by using the brute force, which requires testing all the possible combination of characters for every length of password. Long enough password with mixed types of characters. Passwords with at least 8 characters with upper and lower case numbers, letters, numbers, and special symbols. Long password with mixed types of characters increase the number of possible combinations that need to be tested in the brute force method. Password again and not reusing. The periodic changing and not reusing passwords forces the intruder to identify a new password each time. Thus, it is a good practice to establish a password again policy that forces you to change password periodically, but not too frequently to avoid irritating users. Complex yet easy to remember passwords. Passwords based on data structures that users are accustomed to remembering, like creating acronyms from a personal sentence known only to the users, or the users of certain elements such as rhymes that makes the password more memorizable. Observe that password based on phrases are just and hard to crack, such as random password. It just as easy to remember as name user selections. Passwords should not be shared and should not be written. Writing down or sharing password harm the secrecy. Password that follow suggestions are more effective, more difficult to identify, and harder to determine their cracking utilities. To improve the security, the strength of password should be verified by the system administration and using dictionaries, cracking programs like dictionary programs and or brute process attack programs. It is common practice for the system administration to invoke reactive password checkers to identify weak passwords are used to practice to filter out certain classes of weak passwords when the user inputs the password for the first time. Also, password files should be protected properly and the passwords should be encrypted at hash. Human authentication. Some mechanisms ensure human authentication and protect against automated programs used by attackers. An example of such an as mechanism is the one used by Microsoft Hotmail, which introduced a picture with some character set and asked the user to identify the character set in the picture as shown in the given diagram. This mechanism is based on presumption that in most cases an automated program cannot recognize the character in the picture. One way to overcome the problem of sniffing passwords when authentication is done over the internet is by one-time password, which can be implemented using smart cards, uh, a possession-based authentication discussed by. Here we can see how the Microsoft created this to ensure the human authentication. Types of passwords. Password types are categorized in several ways. One categorization is primary and secondary password. According to the level of authentication, primary and secondary password that are used as a first level of authentication, allowing access to the information systems resources through the operating systems are commonly referred as a primary password. Password that are used as a second level of authentication for further control and protection of multi-level access to segments of these resources, sensitive applications, or data files are commonly referred to as secondary passwords. While the mechanism employed in primary passwords are determined by the operating systems, manufacturers, and information systems designers can be selected any types of mechanisms for secondary password. The format of primary password determined by the operating systems, manufacturer users systems, generated passwords or generated user-generated passwords with some predefined rules. A password is automatically generated by the user operating systems and assigned to user. User-generated passwords are shown to be easier to remember but less secure than system-generated password because they are easier to guess. Question and answer passwords. Question and answer passwords are also called secret questions or secret uh, questions. Security questions used mostly as a secondary password. They involve a dialogue between the user and the system, where the user responds to a set of brief questions about their personal facts, opinions, and cues. Thus, in Microsoft Hotmail, where when a user opens a new account after entering the primary password, she must or he or must he or must ensure also enter the question and answer password as shown below. This password is mainly used when the user forgets her primary password and wants the system to help her to recall it. The question and answer password comes into picture and methods of overcoming the difficulty of remembering and password. It is a difficult question and answer session. The user is presented with several randomly selected questions from a set of questions stored in the profile in the operating system. As you can see, the system access to the system or a particular application granted only upon the match between the user answers and those stored in the profile. Cognitive password. A cognitive password is a something that the user may not remember. He just knows it. In conjugative password, the user provides the system the answer to personal fact based on opinion based questions such as the user mother's maiden name or user favorite type of music. Because the passwords were found to be easier to recall than conventional passwords and difficult to guess. When they're selected properly, they are recommended as a way to overcome the difficulty of composing effective passwords. In 1997, Boolean found similar high recall rates for fact-based and opinion-based conjugative items. They also found similar low guessing rates for opinion-based conjugative items. However, the Boolean found a guessing rate for fact-based items to be much higher than the obtained by another researchers called Haga, which led them to conclusion that guessability for such items is too high unless the items are carefully selected. In 1996, Ford found high recall rates for conjugative items similar to those obtained by Haga in 1990. They found unacceptability of high guessing rates for fact-based items and acceptable guessing and recall rates for the opinion-based items found the items. Mm, Bunnell found that fact-based conjugate items were better were better recalled than opinion-based systems. Associative passwords. In associative password, a new user are asked to provide the system with a set of words associations consisting of both cues and their unique association responses. To access the information, the access the system, user must provide the correct associated response to rotating cues sampled from the set of cues that were present provided to the system. 1987, researcher Smith argued that the improved security with a secondary techniques like an research associative password rather than increasing password complexity. Researchers, however, yield inconsistent results about the recall and guessing associative purpose. In 2000, researchers studied the effect of the three different formulation techniques in associated. Also, some recall set response only. Respondents are provided with Q words and are required to generate an associated response for each Q. Q and responses. Respondents generate both Qs and associated responses. Theme. Respondents generate both Q and response words having first decided upon the theme for the word association. No statistically significant differences in recall and guessing rates were found among the three techniques, leading to tentative conclusion that the effect of these formulation techniques on ease of recall is small. Associative passwords required more research to isolate the best method of generating them. Position-based authentication. Authentication based on what the user has is referred to the position-based token and are called token-based. Authentication is it makes easy use mainly of physical objects that the user possesses like tokens. However, presentation of valid token does not prove ownership because it may have been stolen or duplicated or by sophisticated fraudulent means. The tokens are also create problems of administration and or inconvenient for users to carry around. Types of tokens. Tokens usually divided into memory tokens and smart tokens. Memory tokens. Memory tokens stores information but do not process it. Special devices are needed to write and read the data to read to and from the tokens. The most common type of memory tokens is the magnetic card, which is used mostly for authentication together with the knowledge-based authentication mechanism, such as the user's PIN. Memory tokens are inexpensive to produce. Using them with PIN provides significantly more security than PINs or passwords alone. Smart tokens. Unlike memory tokens, smart tokens are incorporate one or more embedded integrated circuits which enable them to process information like smart like smart tokens. Most smart tokens are used for authentication together with the knowledge based authentication mechanism such as the use of pin of various types of smart tokens. The most widely used are those that house an integrated chip containing a microprocessor. The smart card is used in, in the identification and authentication processes, both in network and standalone computer systems. Their portability and cryptographic capability led to the wide use in many e-commerce applications. When, when using smart cards for authentication, the card must first be physically presented to the computer system. Then authentication of system be by the system is performed, a process that actually involves execution of cryptological algorithms. Authentication schemes proposed for enhancing the efficiency and security of smart card includes timestamp based authentication schemes to prevent malicious replay attacks in networks. Jung, a researcher, suggested an effective, efficient password authentication key agreement using uh, token cards. The main merits of these schemes are no password or verification tables is required in the server. User can freely choose their own password. Communication and computation cost is low. It required mutual authentication. It incorporates the key arrangement mechanism by generating a session key agreed on by user and the server. Due to their complexity, smart tokens are more expensive than memory tokens, but they provide greater flexibility and more difficult to forge. Because of the high security levels, smart tokens are also used for one-time password for authentication across the open network. Last one is biometric-based authentication. We refer to authentication based on what the user is as biometric-based authentication. Automatic identification using certain anatomical behavior or physical features characteristics associated with the users. Biometric authentication are based on psychological or behavioral characteristics that reliably distinguish one person from other difference from another. Thus, it is possible to establish an identity based on who the user is rather than by what the user possesses or knows or remembers. Biometric Biometrics includes both the collection of the comparisons of these characteristics. A biometric system can be viewed as a pattern recognition system or consistently of three main modules: the sensor module, the future extraction module, and the future matching module. The use of personal attributes are captured and stored in reference files to be compared for later authentication to determine if the match exists. The biometric system is composed of biometric data of the captured user's personal attributes and necessary to perform user authentication and the software and the hardware required to collect, store, and process the biometric data. Biometric authentication are technically complex and usually expensive because they provide special hardware. They are quite secure but not widely accepted by user because they are the perceptive, instructive, and encroachment on personal privacy through automated means. The ethical issues such as potential misuse of personal biometrics for tracking and productivity. The main use in the systems requiring a high level of security. That emergence of biometric addresses the problem that plague traditional verification methods. They provide the most efficient and accurate identification methods because they cannot easily be stolen or shared. Biometric system also enhance user conventions by the needs of design and remember password. However, while convenient, the decision scan or pattern is vulnerable to network analysis, and once stolen, they cannot be used anymore. All biometric techniques inherited suffer from one level of false match or false not match. False match is a top type 2 error, accepting the match when there is no match. False non-match is a type 1 error, rejecting the match when there is a match. Biometric errors can occur from several reasons. Next.